If you want to look at one other verse with me, Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5. We read Luke 23 before the prayer, where Christ said, "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." Matthew 25 gives us Jesus' teaching on the same subject, and so I wanted to put the two together, the example that he set and then the lesson that he taught. And so Matthew chapter 5, just two verses. Verse 23, "Therefore, if thou bring thy gift to the altar, and there rememberest that thy brother hath aught against thee, leave there thy gift before the altar, go thy way, first be reconciled to thy brother, and then come and offer thy gift." With the subject of forgiveness, I have a book that my father gave me 25, 30 years ago, written by Harold Vaughn on the subject of forgiveness. And I used that book many, many times, highlighted it, wore it out, actually, and have replaced it. I now have a new copy of that book that I use in my library. I taught that book as a Sunday school lesson at the church that I was attending. I taught an adult Sunday school class before I became pastor here, and taught through that. And then when I was first candidating here at Cedar Hill, and that I was interim pastor November 2004 and up until February 2005. And in teaching Sunday school here at Cedar Hill back then, almost 15 years ago, I taught that lesson again. And I've continued to pull some thoughts and things like that. They've been intermingled in some of my lessons or sermons through the years since then. And I'm going to do that again today. I just think it's such an important lesson. It's such an important topic. It's something so applicable to each and every one of us. I taught Sunday school today for Brother Walker. I taught Sunday school here in the sanctuary this morning. And we ended up pretty much on the same topic as we talked about Abraham and Lot, and the way that they were able, Abraham in particular, was able to work through the conflict that they had as they separated and divided their herds and went separate ways, and the importance of that conflict resolution. A big part of that, of course, is forgiveness, the heart attitude that goes with that. And so we see Jesus Christ on the cross as he's being crucified and as the weight of all sin, of all humanity is upon his shoulders. And he cries out to the Father, "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." They don't understand. "Father, forgive them," were some of the very last words that he spoke. And that's not in any contrast to the lessons that he taught, as we just read, one of many here in Matthew chapter 5, as he taught about the importance of granting forgiveness and seeking forgiveness. That's a two-way street, depending on the circumstances. There are times we need to go to those and ask for forgiveness for what we've done. Likewise, there are times that we need to grant forgiveness for maybe something someone else has done. And that's covered there in Matthew chapter 5, the importance of that. More important than bringing the gift to the altar is getting those relationships fixed first, is what Jesus taught in Matthew chapter 5. So I want to take a few moments and talk about forgiveness, what it is, what it's not, and how to apply it to our lives. We're going to look at some verses here at the end of my message as well. But first, let's look at some things that forgiveness is not. One of the best ways to often define it is to throw out all the things sometimes we like to say that it is. And so forgiveness is not, number one, it's not an emotion. It's not an emotion. It has nothing to do with our feelings. We're a very feelings-based culture today, and so many things are feelings-based. We see that in all of our commercials. This will make you feel good. Look at the way it makes you feel. Look at how this makes you feel. That's an emphasis in our culture today, is the feelings of a situation or a product or an event. Forgiveness is not an emotion. It's not a feeling. Regardless of our feelings, we forgive and grant forgiveness. Number two, forgiveness is not just forgetting about it. Not just forgetting about it. We may not be able to forget about it. In fact, we're human beings. We're often really not very good at forgetting negative things or bad things. That's just not our nature. We're not good at forgetting things. That would be ideal, but that's probably not going to happen. And depending on the severity of the situation, it may be impossible to forget. So forgiveness is not forgetting about it. In fact, maybe we say that almost casually sometimes when someone comes to us and say, "Oh, I'm sorry." We go, "Oh, forget about it. Forget it." Well, we're probably not going to forget about it, and so it's probably not a real good description of what forgiveness is either. Number 3, forgiveness is not just shrugging it off like, "Oh, whatever. People are people. That's life. Whatever." We just shrug it off. We tend to have that type of reaction sometimes. But forgiveness is not just shrugging it off. It's not rationalizing it. It's not saying, "Well, based on the situation, that's the way it was going to go," or, "I couldn't help but say that. Look what they did," or, "I couldn't help but do that. Look at what they did." Or counterwise, if we're in the wrong, or if we were wronged, I should say, "Well, it was my fault. I shouldn't have done that, or I shouldn't have acted like that." Or we can rationalize it, but rationalize it is not getting to the heart of the matter. It's not forgiveness. And forgiveness is not just asking God to forgive them, though that's an important element of it too. But it's not just giving it to the Lord and saying, "God, to forgive them." We need to take some action and bring forgiveness ourselves. So forgiveness is a choice. It's an act of the will. It's no longer keeping accounts. It's no longer keeping a ledger of what people have done and how they've wronged us. We have a tendency in our lives to dwell on the things that upset us. And often the farther removed we get from the situation, maybe the less often we dwell on it. But if someone brings it up, it can stir up those emotions real quick, right? If you've been through, and I use this as an example in our Sunday school class this morning, but if you've been through maybe some church issues where things went bad and you had to leave your former church and it was not good and there were all kinds of problems, we tend to think about that a lot, dwell on that a lot. Maybe it irritates us or angers us. Over time, that starts to fade, but if someone brings it up, we can really quickly go back and start to list all the things that happened and all the things that went wrong and the things that people said, and they're right there. We can pull them back up real quick if we want to, and that may be the case with our spouse, or with other relatives, or with coworkers, with people we have a problem with. We're real quick to bring that up. We keep a short account list right there ready that we can go back to it real quick if we have to and bring some of those things up. I use this. I wasn't going to bring this up today. I don't have a lot of time, but I mentioned it in Sunday school, and so I'm just going to keep going with it. 1999, my dad died. April 99, my dad died. And I'm on the church board of my dad's church. I'm vice chairman of the board of deacons at my dad's church. And there were some difference of opinions and different directions. Different people wanted to go, and new ideas of where we were headed, and different things going on. And there was some conflict, right? Of course, there's conflict. The pastor's gone suddenly, and there's some conflict in the board and in the church of which way we're headed. And there was a time that I kept all the documents from those board meetings. I had my board minutes. I had all my stuff. It was in a file cabinet in my office at home. All that, I kept it. And, obviously by the end of that year, I left the church. That was the right thing to do. I left the church and went on to another church and began to attend somewhere else. And things worked out well there, and they're doing fine. And we all have a great relationship now. And I gave the details of that in Sunday school, but I kept some of that stuff. I kept those minutes. You know how important church minutes are from 20 years ago, right? And I didn't keep them 20 years, but I had them in my file for a while there. And it was probably, 5, 6, 7 years ago, I was cleaning out some stuff and redoing some files. And I came across this whole batch of stuff from those board meetings in 1999. And I went, honestly, I don't really hardly remember. The Lord's worked this whole situation out in a great way. And I picked it all up and put it where I should have put it 20 years ago. And that was right in the trash can. That was literally, keeping some records and keeping some accounts. We tend to do that, though, mentally most of the time, don't we? We keep a running list in our head of all the things that someone did, and you don't know how they wronged me, and you don't know what they said, and you don't know how this was, and we keep this running list in our head. Listen, if we're going to forgive, we got to get rid of the list. We got to get rid of we can't go over it. We can't dwell on it. We can't sit there on that, 3 o'clock in the morning when we can't sleep and start to dwell on that, because the next thing you know, our blood pressure is going up. We're getting irritated and agitated. We dwell on those things until they just drive us to the point, we're going to look at it, eventually towards bitterness. We can't let that happen. The Bible teaches us to forgive. We're going to keep getting back to this because it's our example. But look at what Christ forgave. He forgave all the sin of all mankind. In the midst of his agony on the cross, he forgave. And if he can forgive us all that we have done, then what a small thing for us to hold on to that comment someone made, or that incident, or that event, or that little thing. It's so, and we understand this, we do, it's so minuscule in the enormity of all that Christ forgave for us. And yet we struggle with that. And yet they do kind of eat away at us, these little things that we make big things, but in the picture of Christ, they're such small things. In all that he forgave, they're small details. So forgiveness is a choice. It's an act of the will. It's no longer keeping accounts. I choose to forgive, which means I'm not going to hold that against you, right? I'm not going to keep bringing it up. I'm not going to do that anymore. I've said before, and I mean this sincerely, I think this is absolutely essential for anyone in church leadership, especially as the pastor. But there should be no one that we have to avoid in our life. There should be no one that if we run into them at the giant supermarket or the Hoss's salad bar line or wherever we happen to just venture in our daily life, we run into them, we're like, oh, and we leave. Or we have to walk out. Or we go down the other aisle. There should be no one like that. If so, then that's what I'm talking about today. Because we have a ledger there and we hold things against them and we don't want to see them and we don't want to talk to them. And I'm going to take, because of my limited time today, listen, we don't have to be best friends with them either. Do you understand that? Abraham and Lot, that's what we looked at today. Abraham and Lot in the Old Testament. Or Paul and Barnabas in the New Testament. Didn't agree. And they just went their separate ways. But what we looked at with Abraham and Lot is the moment Lot got in trouble, it was Abraham that came running to help him. Right? Abraham said, this is not working. We're not getting along. There's too much conflict. We should go separate ways. We should go separate places. But if you need me, I'm the first person to call because I'll be right there to help you. Paul and Barnabas had a falling out over John Mark. But throughout the rest of the ministry, Paul spoke highly later on of John Mark and his profitability in the ministry. There's times that we need to maybe, got my 5 and 3-year-old, right? To say that a 5 and 3-year-old little boy don't get along sometimes is an understatement, The conflict, right? No matter what it is, every little thing, things that shouldn't be things become things when a 5 and 3-year-old. And we want them to get along, they're brothers, and we got the thing where they work it out and they say they're sorry and they give each other a hug, and we want them to be buddies because they're brothers. And they'll get to grow through that as they get a little older. Me and my brothers did, We don't have to become best friends, but we do have to be able to not keep accounts, not get angry when we see someone, not get upset when they come our way. We need to be able to be civil. We need to be able to forgive. in spite of some of the things that people have done. Scripture tells us what would happen to us if we don't forgive. So this is where we're going to look at a few verses. Matthew 25, verse 40. Matthew 25 and verse 40. Matthew 25, 40. I'm just jumping on this one verse here, but we'll see the context. And the king, notice it's capitalized, the king shall answer and say unto them, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto the least of these, my brethren, you have done it unto me. There's a real problem there. There's some spiritual death that can occur if we don't forgive. If we hold on to that problem, if we hold on to that conflict and make it an issue in our lives, it can affect us spiritually. It will affect us spiritually because we're holding on to it as if we were holding it against God himself. We need to deal with those things. We need to take care of those things. One other one, Mark 11:24. Mark 11:24. While you're turning there, I'm going to go ahead and start reading. Mark 11:24. Therefore I say unto you, what things soever ye desire, when ye pray, believe that ye receive them, and ye shall have them. And when ye stand praying, forgive, if ye have aught against any, that your Father also which is in heaven may forgive you your trespasses. It tells us here, it tells us in a number of passages, how that unforgiveness will affect our prayer life. It will affect our prayer life. It will affect us having prayers answered. If we regard iniquity in our heart, the Bible tells us the Lord will not hear us. We need to deal with those things. We need to get on board and confront those issues for our spiritual well-being. If we don't forgive, it begins to affect others. I think it begins to affect a larger group. It's like a pebble in a pond, and the ripples continue to go out. And so if we have that problem in our lives, that conflict in our lives, it begins to affect others that are involved in that situation. We need to be very careful with that. Of course, more importantly than that, it can become a stumbling block to the unsaved. Bible tells us, Christ told his followers, you are to love one another. By this shall all men know that you have me. If be followers of Christ, the love for each other is what should distinguish us. That's what the lost should look at and say, look at the way they love each other. There's something different about them. But if they see infighting or problems, whether it's in our family or in a church or between a husband and wife, if they see that conflict, they look at them and say, well, they're no different than everybody else, right? Just like everybody else. Why would they want what we have if it doesn't change us? They need to see a change in our lives, or it could become a stumbling block to the unsaved. It's been proven time and time again that if we don't forgive, it can often lead to some physical problems, depression. When we don't forgive and it begins to work its way downward in the spiral towards bitterness, we tend to not sleep right or not eat right. It affects our health. It affects our well-being. We understand how it affects us spiritually. It starts to affect us physically as well. It's a problem. But there should be reconciliation. And Matthew 18 gives us the answer to that. Matthew 18 and verse number 15. Matthew 18 gives us a system to work on this. Verse 15, moreover, if thy brother shall trespass against thee, go and tell him his fault between thee and him alone. If he shall hear thee, thou gained a brother. But if he will not hear thee, then take with thee one or two more, that in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. If he shall neglect to hear them, tell it unto the church. If he neglect to hear the church, let him be unto thee as a heathen man and a publican. And so we have a process there, verse 15, 16, 17, to go to the person, to take a witness with us, to deal with it in the church if we have to. But there's a process there of how to deal with conflict and how to deal with a resolution to a problem that we may have. I always found it interesting. Just think about this as a side note. As Jesus Christ is teaching this here in Matthew chapter 18, he tells them in verse number 17 to take it unto the church, that they may hear it in the church. Isn't it interesting? The church doesn't start till the book of Acts. We don't even have a church yet in the book of Matthew, in the ministry of Christ. The church starts after Christ is risen. The church starts after his ascension, actually. And the church begins in the book of Acts as they begin to meet on the first day of the week. Jesus Christ has been going into the synagogue and into the temple and teaching and preaching, but there's no church yet, and yet that's exactly the wording that he uses because it's for us. It's for us to understand how to resolve these conflicts, how to resolve these problems. Within a church, if there is a problem, take it to one. Go to that person, deal with it, take someone with you, work through the problem. If not, there's a church to help with that. There's a church situation to be able to help with that problem. But we want to reconcile those problems. Dealing with forgiveness will often lead to revival. And I preached on that particular topic last year. But so many times, and I saw this growing up in my father's church, when people began to get things right with each other, there was revival in the church. It spread throughout the whole church. I've told you before, there was a family where there had been some conflict within the family. And a dad and an adult daughter hadn't talked in years. And during this course of revival meetings, they got that right. They met at the altar after a service and they resolved that. And boy, once they did that, that revival spread to the rest of the church. Attendance picked up. People got things right. That revival, the spirit of revival went on for a period of time in our church, but it started when people started making things right with each other. Often that is what's holding back revival in churches. One more verse, Romans chapter 12. This is our last one. Romans chapter 12. Romans 12 gives us some advice on this subject and how to deal with other people. Romans 12, verse 18, if it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. If you can, as much as you can, live peaceably with all men. Someone's going to break into your home and attack your family, can't live peaceably with them, right? Got to deal with the situation. That's why Romans 12:18 is written the way it is. There's a time you need to protect. There's a time you need to defend. But as much as lies within you, if it be possible, live peaceably with all men. I don't want to have any conflicts with my neighbors, you know. I get along with all my neighbors around my house. I help them if they need help. We work together on things. We shovel snow with each other when the snow gets deep. You know, we work together. We want to live peaceably. There's a neighbor across from me. So the other side of my next door neighbor. And him and his neighbor fight terribly. Terribly. I mean, they've built some fences. They had a bush that was halfway, I guess, bordered the property. And the one went out one day and cut it right in half. I mean, in half. Top to bottom. So one side is as dead as a piece of plywood, you know. The other side's all green and stuff because he wanted his side gone, you know. They always are yelling and fighting and arguing and mowing, and your leaves are on my property and your grass clippings came over here. It's just constant little badgering stuff. Don't you think, as a simple example, Romans 12:18, as much as lies within you, live peaceably with all men. My one neighbor down at the end of my property, my piece of property is like a big rectangle. And so to the left of my house, if you look at my house to the left, it goes way down the road. It's kind of not very deep, but real wide. And down at the end of my property, there's a mobile home down there, and a disabled lady lives in there, and she hired new people to mow her grass this year. And Desi and I noticed when we were out working on this mulch yesterday, her mower guys that come and mow for her are mowing like 15, 20 feet up into my property. And Des said, I don't know why they're mowing up that far. And my answer was, I don't know, but now I don't have to mow it. You know, I I know where the stakes are, you know. She knows where the stakes are. If those guys want to mow 20 feet of my grass, knock themselves out, you know. But people have conflicts over stuff like that, right? They have big fights over that. They have big disagreements over that. And listen, I know I'm making light of some neighbors and grass and bushes and stuff like that, but we tend to get worked up over things that we don't have to, that don't have to cause those divisions. Things we could work together if we sat down and worked it out. Jesus Christ is our example of forgiveness. Listen, 8-10 weeks ago, when I began to preach this series, I wrote down on my desk, it's literally, I have one of those desk pads that I write all my notes on and stuff, and I rip it off every month or two and just write notes. And I wrote down what I'm going to preach on. Jesus is our example of, and I began to write down all the different things. And I've added to it and changed some of them or put a couple together as a topic. But forgiveness was one of them. It was about the 7th or 8th one. And I just worked my way down to it this week. And I knew this was what I was going to preach on this week, probably a couple weeks ago. But I know this is the type of subject that when I preach on it, there's going to be a few people that go, oh, he's talking about me. Now listen, I'm talking about me too. I'm talking about all of us. I am, right? Because there's things in our lives that we get angry about, we get upset about, that we don't have to. We don't have to. Desi and I buy the kitchen supplies for Cedar Hill Baptist Church. We order them, or Desi orders them, and she orders them through Amazon. We have an account set up. We're tax exempt. It's all corporate stuff, and so we just order everything through Amazon, and they deliver it. It's wonderful. And we decided we needed some saran wrap, cling wrap for the kitchen, and we ordered a commercial roll of cling wrap, and it came with a nice little cutter on it, so it's wonderful stuff. I have a little one at home, and it's wonderful, so I got a nice big one for church. Nice big thing of cling wrap. It has a cutter on it. You just pull through and slice it off, and it works great, because we use a good bit of that here. And we had a dinner a couple months ago, and someone pulled it out and had no idea what this goofy little piece of plastic was and threw it away. You know? And so now we have 1,000 feet of cling wrap with no cutter. I don't know who did that. I don't know. But I was like, that is ridiculous, you know? Now we got to walk around and cut this stuff. I started to get mad about the cutter on the cling wrap, you know. It doesn't really matter. We can rip it for the next 3 months. We'll just rip it. Don't feel bad. We'll get it. But I know there's marriages that have had fights about that, you know. You've had fights over the organization of a drawer or the mess in the cupboard or the cutter on the cling wrap. You know, listen to me, I'm serious. Don't you think that's what Romans 12:18, if it be possible, as much as lies within you, live peaceably with all men. Work on that. Let's work these things out. We don't have to have a fight and a division over these type of issues. We can work through these things. I think that's what Romans 12 is all about. Let's pray. Hi, this is Pastor Wes Gunther. We just want to take a moment to thank you so much for listening to the recording of my message today. At Cedar Hill Baptist Church, we would like to be of help and encouragement to you, and we would love to hear from you. If we could pray for you, if you have a prayer request that you'd like to share with us, if you'd like to give some feedback on the message that you heard today, we encourage you to send us an email and let us know how we can help you. Our email address is cedarhillbap, cedarhillbap@gmail.com. You can get more information about our ministry at our website, chbcdillsburg.org. Thank you.